over.
Okay.
Hope I'm doing it from up here. And
Well, hello, everyone. We are live and we are simultaneously live streaming right now on YouTube as well as on X. So, for those of you on X, we will be taking some questions near the end. And for those of you on YouTube, hello. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Robert, for being a part of this conversation. I know that we have a lot of people interested to hear from you. You have quite a fascinating background, an aerospace engineer, author of many books, startup founder, and of course, an advocate for Mars. So, how are you doing today?
doing great. Good to see you, Ellie.
Great. Nice to meet you too. And, I've been going over some of your background and some of your talks that you've given. And I wanted to start, I know you get asked this all the time, but what are some of the reasons for Mars? You've talked about it's where the science is, it's where the challenge is, and it's where the future is.
Oh, that's right. So, in the near term, in terms of the motivation for, say, NASA, which is an agency devoted to scientific exploration, Mars is where the science is. Mars is the Rosetta Stone for letting us know whether life is a phenomenon unique to the Earth or a general phenomenon in the universe, and whether life as we know it on Earth is the pattern for what all life is, or whether it's just one example drawn from a much vaster set of possibilities. Um, the the early Mars was very similar to the early Earth. It was a warm, wet planet with a CO2 dominated atmosphere. Life evolved here. Does it evolve wherever you have those sorts of conditions? Uh, those conditions are probably quite widespread on planets. If it occurs as a general rule where you have that as the starting condition, life's everywhere. Uh, can't find that out by going to the moon. Can't find that out by going to asteroids. Find it out by going to Mars.
Right.
And so it's fundamental. Then, in terms of the challenge, you know, a challenge is valuable. You grow when you challenge yourself. And the United States challenged itself with Apollo, and we doubled our number of science graduates in that decade. And we've been benefiting from that intellectual capital ever since. Humans return to the moon, sure. It would excite some people. I mean, frankly, the movie Top Gun excited some people to want to become aerospace engineers, but not like Apollo. Okay, you can't inspire a new generation with the challenge of repeating something their grandparents did, and
Right.
or even their great grandparents, frankly. Uh, Whereas Mars today, Mars is that challenge. Mars gets to the fundamental desire of youth to do things that have never been done before, to go where no one has gone before. Okay. And that's the benefit of Mars. And then finally, and now this goes beyond NASA's remit, but it's where the future is. Mars is a planet with all the resources needed to support life and therefore technological civilization. And if we can go there in our time and learn how to turn Martian materials into resources, then Mars becomes a place we can settle and where new branches of human civilization can be born and add their creativity to the human story through technology and invention. They will be a powerhouse of invention with a technologically adept population in a frontier environment that frees them to innovate and forces them to innovate. And they'll make social innovations to facilitate this, just as America did, frankly. And to make use of all your human capital when you have it in such uh, conditions of labor shortage that we had in early America, and we'll have vastly more forcefully on Mars. Uh, and just history of great deeds waiting to be done. This is what we can do. We can create the future. And it is not a question of abandoning the earth. Quite the contrary. It's creating more partners for Earth. Europeans came to America, but actually only a tiny fraction of the Europeans that were in Europe came to America. But what they did do was create a new branch of Western civilization, which greatly strengthened Western civilization and human civilization through inventing, the pioneering democracy and electricity and, aeroplanes and computers and nuclear power. I mean, these are all American inventions. Uh, so it's together to Mars, and then it's together to Mars. Let's build the future.
Yeah, I feel like that's a big misconception that people have. It's like, why are we focused on Mars or the moon? We need to save Earth. And I don't think they see the value of the journey. And that's one thing that I recognized during, I think you did a talk on April 5th, or I'm sorry, August 5th. And you talked about that the basis of the Martian economy will be a lot of invention. So can you expand on that?
Sure. Mars will be an inventive culture. Um, it has to be. It will be faced with many new challenges that will require invention, and it will have the kind of people there to do invention, and uh, and it will have to have social forms that facilitate creativity as well. And there may be a number of attempted Mars colonies, but only those that have this feature will succeed, and that therefore will become the prevalent form of Martian civilization.
Right.
But these sorts of inventions, dealing with such fundamental challenges as a severe labor shortage, as a great shortage of land for producing food, that is usable land. There's plenty of land on Mars, but the actual farmable land will be in greenhouses or tunnels or something. Uh, and energy issues where you don't have fossil fuels, and solar power is weak and wind power is much too weak. You're going to have to do advanced forms of nuclear. So labor shortage, that will drive the Martians to innovate in areas of, labor-saving machinery and automation, but also robotics and artificial intelligence. These are all ways to multiply the power of labor. The food, they're going to be innovators in biotech and synthetic biology. And because they're going to want to have the absolute maximum productivity per square meter of farmable space. Energy, once again, the fossil fuels is not an alternative for them, and so they're going to have to get serious. And the now, either with advanced nuclear fission or with fusion, both of which are candidates. See, nuclear fission has been stymied on Earth for two reasons. One is hyperregulation, which we've had the luxury of doing because we have the fossil fuel alternative. And the other is the fission fuel under these conditions where construction costs have been enormously inflated by regulators. The fuel then is only 5% of the cost of the energy. And so even though the light water reactors that are the overwhelming number of reactors in the world only get about 1% of the energy in the uranium, they can afford it. And why try a breeder reactor when the fuel doesn't cost you much, and trying to introduce a new kind of reactor is going to give even more trouble from the regulators than just trying to get them to pass on something they've seen 100 of before. And so there's been basically very little progress in nuclear fission since the late 50s. And but there are new kinds of nuclear reactors that not only can breed fuel, they can breed it from thorium, which is 4 times as common as uranium. And then there's fusion, which is some research in fusion, but there's no urgency to it because we have these alternatives. Mars doesn't have the alternatives widely available on Earth, but what it does have is deuterium is 5 times as plentiful on Mars as it is on Earth. Wow. So the Martians are going to be driven to develop advanced nuclear fission and fusion. And the pattern we're going to see here, it is similar to America, which became a nation of invention. The British invented the steam engine. We invented the steamboat. The first steamboat was actually demonstrated to the assembly that was trying to draw up the U.S. Constitution in 1787 in Philadelphia. Incidentally, it was called the Perseverance, same as the current Mars rover. And the first practical steamboat, the Claremont, was demonstrated on the Hudson River. And interestingly, the person who financed that was Robert Livingston, who is the person who negotiated the Louisiana Purchase. Now, what is the link there? Well, you want to develop the West, the rivers or the highways of early America. And sailboats won't cut it on rivers, so you've got to have steamboats. And the steamboats led to high pressure steam engines, which then enabled railroads, which is the absolute revolutionary invention of the 19th century. Totally transforms the nature of the world. And then we developed telegraphs and the instant communication over long distances. The world is radically transformed by steamboats, railroads, telegraphs. These are American inventions. And and then electricity, centrally generated electrical power, and also then recorded sound, motion pictures, so airplanes, you name it. So Mars is going to be the new America. Now these inventions, though, that they make to meet their own needs, they're going to license on Earth. And those patents will then bring in the income required for imports. The easiest thing to export across interplanetary distances is not materials, but data. And the most valuable data there can be is a patent. And so the cost of transmitting a patent is trivial. The value of a patent licensed on Earth could be billions of dollars. And then it will therefore, by definition, benefit Earth.
Right. And I think that's really important to bring that full circle, that going to Mars will benefit Earth. People need to know that. It's obvious that you've spent a lot of time thinking about Mars. You have a very good vision. So what sparked your fascination in all of this? How long have you been thinking about this?
Well, since 1957. That is, I was 5 when Sputnik flew. And I was already I was an early reader. I was reading science fiction. And while Sputnik may have terrified the adults, it delighted me because it meant that all these stories I was reading about space travel were going to be true.
Yeah.
That's what it meant. So, Homer Hickam has produced a book and a movie that describes how Sputnik affected him. Well, I was a bit younger than him. He was a teenager. I was 5. But still, it had that kind of impact on me. And so I got totally into it. And my parents encouraged my interest. My father got me a telescope, and I did drawings of the moon through the eyepiece. And I started reading more science. And it was very apparent, actually, within a short amount of time, that Mars was the most interesting place to go. Mars was where there could be life. Mars was clearly much more promising a place for settlement. And so there I am growing up, a preteen and then a teenager in the 60s. And we were going to the moon by 1970 and Mars by 1980 and Saturn by 1990 and Alpha Centauri by the year 2000. And I wanted to be part of that. Okay. And of course, the only part of that program that was actually realized was moon by 1970. In fact, we made it by 1969. But NASA did have plans to continue to Mars, in fact, to land humans on Mars in 1981, but they were canceled by the Nixon administration. It was an enormous failure of vision. It's like Christopher Columbus coming back from the New World and saying, "Look what I found," and people say, "Who cares? Get lost." And so that derailed things for a while, but I preserved that ambition. I accepted it as a reality in the 70s, became a science teacher. But around 1981 to, I'm living in northern Manhattan and teaching in science and math in Brooklyn and commuting each way on the subway, an hour and 15 minutes each way on the A train, and reading books by Herman Melville about sailing the South Seas and saying, what am I doing here? And so I decided to go back to school, and I went to graduate school. And there I got advanced degrees in nuclear and aerospace engineering.
Wow.
And there I heard about this group of people led by Chris McKay and Carol Stoker, who called themselves the Mars Underground. They were holding conferences in Boulder, where NASA was saying its agenda is space shuttle, is satellites. I actually had an interesting experience while I was a teacher in New York. Hans Mark, who was the deputy administrator of NASA at that time, this was like 1981 or 2. Shuttle first flew in 81. This might have been 2. And he was speaking at some conference, I think, of the American Chemical Society or something like that. And I heard about it. And so I just went. And I confronted him from the floor. And I said, what happened to Mars? Because he's up there saying the shuttle is flying and this is now what we're going to do. We're going to launch satellites and they'll tell us about the weather and all this stuff. And I was saying, what about Mars? Why aren't we supposed to go to Mars after this?
Right.
And he said, oh, well, those were the dreams of youth. We're now older and wiser. And Judith Resnick, who was an astronaut, later killed on the Challenger, she was up on the podium on a panel to his side, and she jumped in and contradicted him.
Wow.
Said, no, this is what we have to do. And you in the audience, if you want this to happen, you've got to do something about it. So I decided to do something about it.
Wow. And you know what? You and Elon both had that moment of what about Mars? And I want to talk about Elon for a little bit because I feel like he might be the only other person who matches your level of passion and fascination about Mars. And so if you wouldn't mind touching on, how important Elon Musk is to the Mars mission.
Well, Elon Musk is very important. Now, you should know that I was among those who helped recruit Elon to the Mars cause. He read my book, The Case for Mars. And came to a Mars Society fundraiser in Silicon Valley and joined our board for a while. But then he decided that he could do more on his own. And so he went off and started SpaceX. And that's great. Now, what Musk has done, well, a couple things. First of all, he's through introducing mostly reusable systems, he has cut the cost of space launch by a factor of 5. That is, the cost of space launch was astronomical at the time of Sputnik. It fell down to about $10,000 a kilogram by the time of the Apollo moon landing, and it stayed there for the next 40 years until 2010. It was like a law of physics, $10,000 a kilogram. And then Musk starts introducing first new ways of doing business, not cost plus, but fixed price. But then more profoundly, the mostly reusable Falcon 9 and then the Falcon Heavy. And over the past decade, he's cut the cost of space launch from $10,000 a kilogram to $2,000 a kilogram. And if Starship is successful, you need Starship to be successful because right now there are 5 companies in China that are working on doing knockoffs of the Falcon 9. And in addition to basically Blue and Rocket Lab are also working on vehicles comparable to the Falcon 9. 2-stage to orbit, reusable first stage, expendable upper stage kind of vehicles. So if he wants to maintain his dominant position, which he certainly has right now, he's got to make his own Falcons obsolete. And that's exactly what he's trying to do. So if Starship is successful, you'll probably reduce the cost of launch by another factor of 5. To $400 a kilogram, something like that. They claim they can go even beyond that, but I think that, and that would be huge. And now, what are the consequences? First of all, he hasn't just introduced some very useful hardware systems, the Falcons, the Dragons, so forth. He's proven a point, which is that it's possible for a well-led entrepreneurial team to do things that it was previously thought that only the governments of superpowers could do. And not only that, do them in 1/3 the time at 1/10 the cost, and even do things that they had just said were impossible, like reusable launch vehicles. And as a result of this, he has set off an entrepreneurial space industry revolution.
Right.
And not only in terms of other launch companies, but spacecraft companies and space technology companies, all sorts of people saying, if that cat can do it, I can do it, because, whatever. And interestingly, it's not just other billionaires with money to burn. Rocket Lab was founded by working engineers who found real investors, and they're from New Zealand, and New Zealand doesn't even have a space program, and they've reached orbit through private enterprise. And so this is going on now. But also we now have at least 3 private space station projects that people are pursuing. How can a private entity do a space station? Well, if you knock down the price of launch by a factor of 5, it then becomes possible.
Right.
And I think these are going to pursue orbital research labs as a promising activity that could be done on such private stations. And there are other things, too, that could follow, even eventually orbital tourism, because, in the 90s, Bigelow started his space hotel business, but it was unrealistic because there was no cheap way to get to orbit. But now that's going to become possible. Now, the more of these space businesses there are, the more launches there are going to be. The cheaper launches are, the more launches there are going to be.
Right.
And the more launches there are, the cheaper space launch is going to be. So it's a virtuous cycle. Okay. And then furthermore, the cheaper launch is, the less conservative spacecraft designers need to be. If your launch is going to cost you $300 million, you're not going to risk the mission by trying some novel battery that is going to weigh half as much as the state of the art. No, you say, I'm going to use something that has already flown. I'm not taking any chances, and so forth. And that's been the wisdom among spacecraft designers basically since around 1970, because by 1970, there was at least something you could use to do anything you wanted to do. So you didn't have to invent something new. In the 60s, you had to invent new things because it didn't exist. But by the 70s, no, there was always some way to do something. So why do something else? This is a proven thing. And so it's like the person who won't see any movies he hasn't seen before. You saw The Wizard of Oz as a kid. It's a good movie. Why see anything else? We're just going to watch The Wizard of Oz from now on. Now, so that's not a formula for progress. But now, with the launches being made cheaper, the spacecraft designers become more adventurous, and so you greatly accelerate the rate of innovation in space technology, and that makes the various missions more cost-effective. So you got more capable, more cost-effective spacecraft, cheaper space launch, boom. So this is what Musk has let loose. And Musk, however, it must be said, is not just about doing this to do business. Musk wants to get to Mars. And the other thing that Musk is an illustration of is the power of ideas, because actually his 2 most important ventures, Tesla and SpaceX, were both counterintuitive from a business point of view. Electric cars were always a loser before Musk. Electric cars have been around a long time. Thomas Edison invented the electric car.
Right.
There were electric cars before there were gasoline cars. Okay, and they were put out of business by gasoline cars because they were much more capable. So, and there's been a lot of people between Edison and Musk who came along and said they were going to do electric cars and didn't get very far. Okay, and he's made it work. And then SpaceX, okay, entrepreneurial space. He wasn't the first to try, okay, but he was the first to make it work. But these 2 things were both motivated by vision. They were motivated by a desire to do something important historically, not the easiest path to a profit.
Right.
So that is Musk. And the other thing I would say with Musk, now, I mean, look, Musk's a difficult person. I know him personally. There's a lot of stories about Musk. Some of them are true, some are not, but it doesn't matter. The point here is, not that he's the easiest guy to get along with, because he isn't. Not that he's the nicest person you're ever going to meet, because he isn't. He's very tough. He's not Mother Teresa. Um, but and he's not selfless. I would say his motive is he wants eternal glory for doing truly great things. Okay, that's the motivation of like a Homeric hero. Okay, but that is the motivation of a hero. That is the motivation of someone who ends up doing great things. We all have our payoff. In the case of Musk, it's not money; it's kleos, eternal glory for doing great things, and that's what's motivating him, and he's doing it now. I disagree with Musk on particularly Ukraine, for example, but his accomplishments with SpaceX are world historic.
Right. Right. Well, and I think it must be interesting for you to see people, kind of copycats and people that are inspired to try when you were there in the beginning, and seeing that no one wanted to try this. They didn't think it was possible. And Tanya says, I didn't know that about Elon and the Mars Society. So can you take me back to that early interaction and that sort of recruitment that you had with him?
Sure. Okay, well, the main recruitment was really done by my book, The Case for Mars, okay, which came out in '96. I don't know exactly when he read it, but the book was quite successful. We sold over 150,000 copies. It really was quite something. But we held, and that was really the basis that helped kick off the Mars Society, because I got 4,000 letters from people who read The Case for Mars.
Wow.
Some emails, but actually at that time, mostly real stamped letters. And they were from all over the world. They were from engineers at JPL and astronauts, yes, but they were also firemen in Saskatoon and 12-year-old kids in Poland, and a director of a major metropolitan opera and banker in Paris, and all sorts of people, and they're all saying all sorts of things, but really what they were all saying was, how do we make this happen?
Wow.
And so I looked at this response, and I got together with my friends in the Mars Underground, Chris McKay, Carol Stoker, Tom Meyer, Penny Boston. I said, look at this. If we could pull these people together, we'd have a force that could actually make something happen. So we called the founding convention of the Mars Society in Boulder in 1998. 700 people showed up, along with the New York Times, Washington Post, the BBC, so forth. Okay, we had an organization, and we decided to do three things. One, outreach to spread the vision. Second, political work to defend and expand the various government Mars programs. And the third are projects of our own, of which the most important was to build a simulated Mars exploration station in the Canadian Arctic. And so that was our project. And we actually raised close to $1 million and did that in 2000. And then we decided we'd want to have a second station in the American desert, because you could do a lot more missions there. It's much cheaper to operate in the American desert than the high Arctic. So we're doing a fundraiser for the Mars Desert Research Station in Silicon Valley. We had a member in Silicon Valley. His name was Bill Clancy. He was quite well off, had a very nice house with some grounds. And we decided to do a fundraiser there. And it's $500 a plate. And somebody sends in $5,000.
Wow.
And so we look, why send in $5,000? It's $500 a plate. Who's this? Elon Musk. Never heard of him. So we did a little research, and we found out, well, he was one of the heads of PayPal, which we had heard of, because there were these irritating people that wanted to pay their dues through PayPal instead of with credit cards or checks like normal people. But I decided to put that grievance aside. And I met with him for a couple of hours, like a 2-hour cup of coffee before the event. and I made sure I had the right people sitting next to him at the event, and we recruited him, and he came to my place in Denver, and he gave $100,000, which really did
helped.
Yeah, well, that was a decisive contribution to establishing the Mars Desert Research Station. We had a number of other major donors, but that was one of three big ones, and that got the station built. And then he joined the board, and he did that for a while. And we were talking with him at that time about doing a mission with mice in a spinning capsule in Earth orbit. Where they'd be in 1/3 gravity. And you could see how mammals born on Earth would live in 1/3 gravity, and even how their children would develop in 1/3 gravity, because if in 60 days the mice would actually have children and they would grow to full size. So there's no data on this right now, zero. Okay, people ask me, how's 1/3 gravity going to affect astronauts on Mars? And I say, I think they'll get by, but there's no data. Okay, and we were going to do this. And so he was going to finance this. And so I set him up with a friend of mine named Jim Cantrell, because to be like his technical advisor. Mm-hmm. And at this time, the cheapest rockets around were available in Russia, because there were all these old Soviet rockets that people were selling for nothing. Well, not quite nothing, but much less than American rockets.
Right.
And so the two of them went over there, and they met with Cantrell. Had a lot of contacts in Russia, and the Russians looked at Musk and they thought, here's this kid, we can take him for a ride. He's a fool. We'll just rip him off. And Musk may be a lot of things, but he's not a fool. And he could see how they were dealing with him, and he could see that they were all a bunch of crooks, and he didn't want to deal with them at all. And on the plane back, he says to Cantrell, look, we got to start our own rocket company. And they did. And they started SpaceX. And Cantrell was the first chief engineer of SpaceX. Later on, they had a parting of ways, and Cantrell went and started another rocket company. But nevertheless, he was the first to got the thing going. And that was SpaceX. That's the genesis. And well, I've left something out there. Of course, Musk is thinking about this now. And he and I had a phone conversation. And, he said, look, like what the Mars Society is doing, but I'm not the kind of person that wants to be part of somebody else's deal. Okay, I got to leave the show.
Right.
And and there's two things. I've already made all the money I could possibly use in my life. Okay, he cashed out of PayPal at just the right time.
Right.
Now he's worth like $180 million at that time. Now he's worth about 1,000 times that. Amazing. But the $100 billion, but still, it's pretty rich. And didn't need to work, buy groceries. But he says, look, I want to do something important. And I'm thinking of two things. Either humans to Mars, make humanity multiplanetary, or solar energy. Solar energy is the key to stopping global warming, so forth. Well, I argued forcefully for Mars. I said, look, solar energy, the business case for solar energy is obvious. If anybody can make solar energy that is cheaper than fossil fuels, it's going to take off. And if they can't, it won't. And anybody who's got a credible story can go to venture capitalists or Wall Street or someplace and find an investor, because if they can do it, the money is there. Okay. Mars, on the other hand, it's not clear at all what the business plan here is. And you can't go into a Wall Street broker and say, here's my plan, humans to Mars, and so forth. So if this is going to happen, it requires someone with more vision than how to make a buck.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
And well, in the end, he decided to do both, and then the car company too. But that was where it came from. Musk's motivation, Musk is very good at making money, but his motivation is not financial. It really isn't. It is this desire to be world historic. That's his greatest strength. It's also his greatest weakness, by the way. But that's where he's coming from.
Well, people are really enjoying the conversation. Todd, thank you for the super chat. He says you're a very interesting guest. And Bimmer Geezer, thank you for the generous super chat. And this leads into my next point. He says, I'm very disappointed with the lack of support for Starship by the US government. And something that I wanted to touch on more is Starship. And actually, Elon, I woke up this morning to find a reply. I posted a little clip from one of my interviews saying, well, why isn't everyone talking about Starship? In all seriousness, though, I operate in an echo chamber, but the truth is most people have no idea what Starship is. And Elon replied saying, true, biggest rocket of all time by far and the first design capable of colonizing Mars, but public awareness is ironically tiny. So first, do you want to talk about Starship, being a promising vehicle to get us to Mars?
Sure. Starship's a very promising vehicle for getting us to Mars. It is a fully reusable heavy lift system with roughly the same payload capability as a Saturn V moon rocket, but maybe 3% the cost because it's reusable instead of expendable. So it can be used for all sorts of space ventures. It could be used with a single launch to launch a Skylab type space station, or it could just be left on orbit and be a Skylab type space station. It could launch giant space telescopes, but it has been designed to send humans to Mars. That's why it uses methane oxygen rocket propellant, which is the easiest high performance propellant combination to make on Mars. You can make it from water and carbon dioxide. And in fact, I've demonstrated that in the lab. And of course, that's the basis of my own Mars Direct plan, which is in the case for Mars and so forth. That is, we don't want to build giant motherships on Earth orbit with orbital infrastructure to build them on, and then fly them off to Mars orbit and land a small party with a small landing craft. It's the von Braun paradigm. No, we want to fly direct to Mars, land on Mars with the whole crew, and come back direct from Mars using propellant made on Mars. Now, Starship is capable of doing that. Now, Starship is actually optimized for Mars settlement. Okay, so if you're thinking as I do, where we're going to do exploration before settlement, okay, then I believe we'd also want a mini Starship that could be lifted to orbit, fully fueled by the Starship, and be shot off to Mars with an exploration crew. And it could land on Mars, be refueled on Mars, and come back. And it would only take about 1/5 the fuel made on Mars to do that trip as it would to send a Starship all the way there and back. But if you're colonizing Mars, you're sending, well, you could send Starships there and back, but I would in fact send most of them just there and keep them there. We don't need to transport large numbers of people from Mars back to Earth. So for every 10 Starships that go to Mars, I keep 9 on Mars. Come 1 to take back a certain number of people. In other words, the colonization is a one-way trip. Okay. So it doesn't make sense to do that. You could keep these on Mars. They could be used as starter housing on Mars. You could use them for transportation around Mars. You could use them for exploitation of the asteroid belt from bases on Mars, which, by the way, is a much more economical way to do it than trying to do it from Earth. And I think one of the, in addition to invention, another principal prop of the Martian economy is going to be supporting the mining of the asteroid belt. That is, if there's a lot of precious metals in the asteroids. Okay, people talk about that, mining platinum and such from the asteroids, and it's there. But if you want to make money off of a gold rush, the way you do it is not by mining gold; it's by selling blue jeans to gold miners. Okay, and this is why the big fortunes were made by the people who stayed in San Francisco. Okay, not by the 49ers who go out with their mining pants. Okay, But San Francisco was built off of sales to the miners. So Mars will be to the asteroid gold rush what San Francisco was for the 49ers, or Seattle was to the Yukon. And so starships based on Mars can reach the main belt. Starships in Earth orbit cannot. Anyway, so I have a technical disagreement with Musk. I think he should develop a mini Starship, which, by the way, would be about the right size to go to orbit by itself as the upper stage of a Falcon 9. That is, you can use the existing Falcon 9 first stage, and the mini Starship as the upper stage. And that would be a fully reusable medium lift system that would complement Starship, which is a fully reusable heavy lift system.
Right.
Now, Musk's answer to me on that is, why do I need it? I want to develop the minimum number of things. Now, the logic there on his part is correct, okay? And it's greatly better than NASA's thinking, which is we want to work on everything that might conceivably be useful, perhaps. He says, I want to do this. Show me why I need it, okay? Now, the reason why they need it is with the smaller Starship being the exploration vehicle, the infrastructure needed on Mars to generate the return propellant would only be 1/5 as large. So, since in fact most of my technical work has been not developing flight vehicles, but developing what NASA calls in situ resource utilization systems,
right.
That is, the systems for making rocket propellant on Mars, those problems are a lot more real to me than they are to Musk, whose work has been on making flight vehicles. So when I tell him, if you do this, the ISRU system can be 1/5 as large, that does not loom as large in his mind as if I did that, I'd have to develop a second flight system. Okay, so that's just a difference. But compared to, say, NASA thinking, where, for instance, you say to NASA, you don't need a lunar orbit gateway to go to the moon, let alone Mars. And they say, yeah, but it might be useful. Artemis is going at a snail's pace, because instead of Apollo's approach, which is we're going to the moon by the end of this decade and don't try to divert us with other projects, okay, their approach is, well, we already have some contracts on this and they'd be unhappy if we canceled it. So we're going to do that before we go to the moon. And furthermore, we will force lunar missions to go to the gateway in order to go to the moon. Because if we let them go to the moon without going to the gateway, it will become apparent to people that there was no reason to build the gateway. Yeah, sure. And in fact, if you look at the Starship mission architecture, which they have embraced, sort of refueling starships in Earth orbit to go to lunar orbit, where they'd be refueled again and then go to the lunar surface and then back up. There's positive and negatives to that scenario, but accepting it, if you go to the gateway, it requires a total of 14 Starship launches to accomplish a single lunar mission using that methodology. Refueling the Starship on orbit, sending it to the gateway, refueling some tankers on orbit to send to the gateway to refuel the Starship there to go down and then up. But if you don't go to the gateway, if you go to low lunar orbit, as Apollo did, it would only take 10. So it's actually harder to do a lunar mission if you use the gateway than if you don't. It's like someone making a requirement on you. If you want to fly from New York to Los Angeles, yes, you can do that, but we need you to go through Saskatoon. And it makes the trip a lot harder.
Right. Wow. I do want to say we have, quite an audience on X listening. So if you have a question for Robert, please make a request. And in the meantime, I want to thank Wicked One Show for the super chat. He wants to know from you, starting from now, what generation do you think we will see over 20 colonizers on Mars? Do you think maybe the 2050s timeframe?
I think certainly by the 2050s, and it could be considerably sooner. Okay, it does depend a lot on Musk, okay, and SpaceX. if Musk is successful, we will have the first humans on Mars by the early 2030s. Um, they, they definitely have that within their power. On the other hand, Musk is a risk taker.
Yeah.
He is. Uh, and not just in technical areas and business areas, but in all areas. And he could skate off the edge of the ice. Okay. Uh, you know, he could. And frankly, I was asked by Time Magazine in their Man of the Year issue about Musk at the December 2021. They asked me a lot of things about Musk, and I told them a lot of good things. But then they said, if he fails, why will he fail? And I said, it will be for the same reason that Napoleon failed in Russia, which was because he had succeeded every time before. Okay. There were all these French generals who told Napoleon, look, why don't we just take Poland and call it good? And if they had done that, they would have been fine. Okay. But Napoleon said, you people always argued for caution before, and you were always wrong and I was always right. So we're going to Moscow. And kaput. And, so Musk has always beaten the odds on everything he's done. But nobody bats 1,000 forever. And so he could overextend himself. And it's possible this Twitter adventure, it could be that, or it could be the next thing. But if he does skate off the edge of the ice, either because of overconfidence or simply bad luck, what if the Starship launch crashes and it kills someone or something? This sort of thing could shut him down. Then it will take longer. If SpaceX should fail, it will add 10 years to the timeline. Then we're talking about humans to Mars in about the early 2040s if SpaceX fails, because there are people copying Musk, but they're about a decade behind him. Okay, so it will happen. Okay, in one sense, he has already succeeded in that he's proven this entrepreneurial model. The cats are out of the box. And so it's going to happen. And if so, well, and that is so because of the demonstration that he has made. Whether he'll be the one who actually makes it there, or whether it is simply people he inspires who makes it there, that will depend upon a lot of factors, including his ability to refocus on SpaceX instead of things like Twitter. And then also things that are luck, because SpaceX could fail because a technician makes a mistake and crosses a wire and nobody catches it. This is a high-risk business.
Well, we do have our first question from the audience on X Space. The floor is yours. Maybe?
Hey, Robert. Considering the vast distance between Earth and Mars, communication delays can be significant. How do you propose maintaining effective communication and decision-making between the two planets? Thank you.
So I think he's...
How do you... Communication and decision-making.
Yes. Oh, you heard it. Great.
Yeah, I more or less. There were some interruptions, but I think I got the main idea. Okay, communicating with Mars is going to be like communicating with someone via email. You send someone an email, they answer you in 15 minutes or half an hour. That's kind of like communicating with Mars, okay? Because at its closest, it takes 4 minutes for your message to get there and 4 minutes to come back. At the furthest, the round trip's more like 40 minutes. But that's a typical email exchange, and people do all kinds of business via email, and it's certainly much faster than letters used to be, and so forth. But then what you need to have on Mars is the capacity to lead the mission.
Right.
Okay, the Mars Society has done at this point almost 300 mission simulations between our Arctic and desert stations. And one conclusion that I would draw from those simulations, which have done with all kinds of crews, American crews, international crews, men, women, and various combinations, you name it, the mission has to be led from the front. We don't even call our mission control anymore. We call it mission support. It's the mission commander who leads the mission.
Right.
Okay. And that's how it has to be. And then in terms of things like monitoring the health of the spaceship and so forth, that all has to be built in and reported to the crew on Mars, where they can respond instantly to some sensor that says, you know, your propellant tank is leaking or this is that's happening. It's not going to be done from Earth. It's got to be done from Mars.
Well, we have another question from Ross. So Ross, whenever you would like to ask, let's see, it looks, yes. Maybe? Ross asks a lot of questions in my chat. So are you there?
Yeah, hello, Ellie. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi.
Yeah, hi, Ellie. Thank you for joining us this morning, this afternoon, Dr. Zubrin, as it is here in the UK. Yeah, I'd be interested, Dr. Zubrin, if you could give us your insights on the kind of uncrewed missions that would be required to go to Mars before we could have a human mission to Mars. You know, the kind of supply missions and maybe a test mission that would happen before that to prove that a vehicle like Starship could actually land safely on the surface of Mars. What are your thoughts on that, please?
Well, I don't think such a mission is required, but if I had the budget for it, what I would do is use the Starship to land a large-scale robotic expedition on Mars. Okay, that is, you know, not land one rover. Let's land a platoon of them or a battalion of them. And not just wheeled rovers, but helicopters and construction robots and such. And there's all sorts of things you could do. First of all, you have a whole bunch of rovers with scientific instruments. You're totally mapping the site. You're also mapping it photographically and returning to Earth a digital simulacrum of the whole region, which can then be explored in virtual reality by people on Earth. And I don't mean just for fun. I mean, although it would be fun, but I mean that you go there, you have enough robots, aided by helicopters as well, perhaps, to map, you know, 10 square kilometers around the hat. And now you can go and start walking around in it as, I call them ghosts, kind of like Patrick Swayze in the movie Ghost. Okay, so you could kind of walk around it. He couldn't really touch anything, except he could communicate through Libby Goldberg. Okay, now, so the idea is you walk around Mars as a ghost, okay, from your local science center, and you come across something interesting. You tell NASA, hey, NASA, get a geology rover over here and hit this rock with a hammer. This looks like a fossil to me. Let's have another look at this. In other words, you can photograph a large area much faster than you can examine it in detail. I mean, after all, you take a photograph of out your window, to actually look at it in detail would take you some time. You can take the photograph in a second. So imagine you're exploring in this way, but you're calling over the rovers. And later on, such ghost explorers could accompany astronauts as well as another pair of eyes on the landscape to call their attention to things worth following up. And then, of course, the helicopters will give us wide-ranging exploration and prospecting. And the construction robots, we could set up a fuel factory, for example, in advance of the crew. And we'd start mining ice, and with the ice plus CO2, which is from the atmosphere, you don't have to mine it, it's everywhere. You make methane oxygen propellant, and we could tank up our Starship that we had landed on Mars with propellant made on Mars. So now we have a fully fueled Earth return vehicle waiting for us on Mars. So when the crew goes to Mars in their Starship, they don't have to refuel it. They could, but the question of whether their fueling operation is going to work has already been resolved. And in fact, it doesn't even have to work because they already have a fully fueled Starship waiting for them before they arrive on Mars. So I think that, well, first of all, in general, once we have a vehicle that can land heavy payloads on Mars, whether it's the Starship or even the mini Starship that I would prefer, that's still a pretty substantial Mars lander. Could land, 20 tons on Mars. A Starship can land 100 tons on Mars. But that compares to the Curiosity system land 1 ton on Mars. So we could do large-scale robotic expeditions, and in fact, I believe NASA should do this. I believe NASA should say, we're going to take Mars exploration to the next level. We're not going to land 1 robot or 2 on Mars. We're going to land expeditions of robots. And that's the natural transition to human exploration. And we're exercising the heavy lander and even the ascent vehicle, if you wanted to. Do a Mars sample return and don't return 5 kilograms from Mars, return 10 tons from Mars, collected by a multitude of robot explorers, and validating the transportation system as you do it.
I'm curious, when was the last time that you approached Elon about the idea for a mini Starship?
Oh, that would have been in February 2020.
Okay. Do you think his opinion would have changed on it now, or probably not?
Well, I don't know. He certainly has been given food for thought by developments since then. Because if they had developed the mini Starship, they could have launched it from the Cape without, a 2-year delay of trying to get permission from regulators. If they had developed a mini Starship, it would be flying right now. There's no question about it in my mind. So I hope he does reconsider it. And it would make everything better. You could lift it fully fueled to Earth orbit by a single Starship and shoot it off to Mars. You could shoot it to the moon. It would be much less awkward as a way to do the lunar mission as well as the Mars mission.
Tell me about it. Todd, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yes, I am a big fan, and I love the fact that you wrote this book and inspired all of us. I wanted to know your opinion on the spectrum of challenges getting humans to Mars, where the concept of the hazards of traversing the space between Earth and Mars lies. Is that a big challenge? Is that something that we know how to deal with? Is that something we need to do lots of research on?
Okay. Well, first of all, let me just say this, because I want to make sure we get to it. I'm writing a new book right now, which is coming out next February. It's called The New World on Mars, What Can We Create on the Red Planet? And it's about settling Mars and what can we create. In other words, I believe it will soon be possible for large numbers of people to go to Mars. And then the key question is, well, what are we going to make of that opportunity? And I look at the forms of society, the technology, the economy, all this sort of thing. And there's a lot of challenges there. In terms of the challenges of a Mars mission, well, there's certainly engineering challenges there, but they're not fundamental. The cosmic ray thing is way overdrawn. Look, there's 2 kinds of radiation in space. There's the solar flares, cosmic rays. The solar flares we can protect ourselves with by having a solar flare storm shelter on the ship made from provisions, the water, the food, and even the wastes. Can shield a small area of the ship so that if there's a solar flare, you go in there and you're safe. The cosmic rays you can't really shield against, but you want to know something? The cosmic ray, the rate of cosmic ray dose between Earth and Mars is just a factor of 2 higher than it is at the International Space Station. Okay, and so if someone goes to Mars in 6 months, which we can do right now, some of our recent Mars probes have even Spirit and Opportunity took 6 months to go from Earth to Mars. Right. Is less cosmic ray dose in that transit than there is in people that, well, the same as those who spent a year on the space station, and less than those who spent longer, or who spent several tours on the space station that amounted to longer. And there's about a dozen astronauts and cosmonauts that fit that description, by the way, and we've seen no radiological symptoms among any of them, nor would we expect there to be, because actually, even using the very conservative linear no threshold methodology of calculating radiation risk, it's only about a 1% risk of getting a fatal cancer later in life from the radiation dose you would get on a round trip Mars mission. And well, if you have a dozen people and they each have a 1% risk, chances are no one has fallen prey to the risk. And that's what we have. The main health impact we see in space actually is not radiation; it's zero gravity. Now, I've been an advocate of artificial gravity, which you can get in space by rotating the spacecraft, or you could have two starships and they could tether off each other nose to nose and spin it up like this, and you'd have Mars gravity, or even Earth gravity if you wanted it. But even that's not fundamental. Certainly, the standard tour on the space station is 6 months, and so everybody who goes to the space station on a standard tour gets exposed to 6 months of zero gravity, and they do recover from that. It does weaken them for a while, but they do recover. I just prefer artificial gravity because, especially if we're doing exploration missions, which involves a lot of field work, you really want people in good shape right from the start if you want to make maximum use of the time.
Right.
Life support systems, we can bring the food for the first human mission to Mars, and we recycle the water. Growing food for a Mars colony, that's a different story. You don't want to import food to feed a 50,000 person Mars town, let alone a larger Mars city. But you can certainly bring food to support a crew of 6 going to Mars and back. Power, I think it's got to be nuclear. But we had nuclear reactors before we had color television. Right. So we can make space nuclear reactors. And then, so now there's a lot of engineering that's got to be done right. I mean, I don't want to trivialize, the work that is being done to try to make Starship work. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if they go through 3 or 4 more failures before they finally get it to work. And it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of sweat, a lot of skill, a lot of thinking, but they will solve the problem. Just as, Falcon 1 failed 3 times before it succeeded. Falcon 9 failed 5 times at landing before it succeeded. Right. The Starship failed about 5 times before it succeeded in landing. Okay. They're willing to put in the work. They're willing to put in the heartache to make it work, and they will. So that is required. The key ingredient is intelligence, passion, and courage, and they have all 3.
And Bimmer Geezer has another super chat, so thank you. He says, all hail Elon, but let's not forget Gwen Shotwell, without whom much of this wouldn't happen. Hope you get to interview her. Have you worked with her much as well?
No, I haven't. I'd like to. I'd like very much Gwen Shotwell would come to our conference. By the way, the Mars Society is holding its next conference October 5th through 8th at Arizona State University, which is near Phoenix. You can find out all about it at www.marssociety.org. The call for papers is still open till the end of August, I believe. So if you want to actually give a talk there on anything relating to Mars exploration or settlement, submit an abstract of no more than 300 words. There's an online way to do it. Actually, I am sending an invitation to Gwen to address our conference. We'll see if she accepts.
That would be wonderful.
But I certainly also agree with the caller that Gwen Shotwell has been absolutely instrumental in the success of SpaceX.
Absolutely. And I definitely will try to be at that conference as well. So thank you. I wanted to also get to that. We have a few other requests. So Nick, if you would like to ask a question to Robert, I think he's still connecting. You there, Nick?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I have a question for Robert.
Okay.
How can someone as a Generation C that is starting out in their career contribute to the needs of this idea of going to Mars and help it to maintain it?
How can someone who is starting their career now contribute to the exploration and settlement of Mars?
To the needs of this idea of going to Mars and to help to maintain it.
To the needs of this idea and to help maintain it.
Okay, well,
exactly.
There's a lot of ways. Okay, if you're technically inclined, become an engineer, and you can join one of either the well-established or startup aerospace companies that are working on solving these problems, or you could get together with other people, including perhaps people who've got business smarts, to start a new startup to develop one or more of the systems required. Okay, so yeah, so we need people with technical talent, we need people with business talent. We also need people with artistic talent. Okay, and yes, and I'm using the term artist in the broadest sense, incorporating well, people actually paint paintings, but people who write books, including novels, people who write poetry, people who make films, all these works of art. The great English poet Shelley said, poets are the legislators of mankind, because they create the visions which are then implemented by the politicians and the businessmen and the technologists. Okay, it's the vision is upstream of all these things. Culture is upstream of politics. It's upstream of invention. Okay, so the Great Martian movie has yet to be made. That will actually inspire people. Victor Hugo said, "Nothing can stop an idea whose time has come," and that is true, provided the idea has the messengers to spread it, so it can recruit the people to its banners to realize it. So look, I've done some technical work, but actually, possibly my largest contribution has been my role in helping to recruit Elon Musk, because that caused, not me exclusively, there were other people too. Okay, but those people who spread that idea, and the people who recruited me, which were science fiction writers like Arthur Clarke and Robert Heinlein, spreading the idea. Okay, so
wait, Robert Heinlein recruited you? A stranger in a strange land?
Not stranger in a strange land. More like have spacesuit will travel. Okay, that is the Heinlein works that influenced me the most were his juvenile works, and the Heinlein. All of his juvenile works, basically, it's usually a boy, and he's got one of these. This is a slide rule, okay?
Okay.
And it's what we used to use to do calculations. And one of these, this is still in use. This is a Swiss Army knife, but he, and he can make his own spacesuit and be kidnapped by aliens and be taken off into the galaxy, but he can deal with it because he's ready. He has a prepared mind. Okay, he's like Odysseus in the Odyssey, who's the man who's ready for anything. Okay, because he's got Athena as his friend. The goddess of wisdom enables him to take on Poseidon, the god of the sea, and all his monsters. Okay, and the Heinlein Red Planet. Okay, so I was just describing, you have space will travel. Red Planet, the boys on Mars are the ones who figure out that the grown-ups are not paying attention to why the life support system of the colony is failing, and they're the ones who save the day, or that is this kind of thing. And but basically that outlook, I think Homer really had it right. He lived at a time when the Greeks were thinking of going to sea, and there were probably conservatives who said, no, let's just stay home. The sea is risky. Anything can happen. And there are strange people out there and all this. And Homer's there saying, well, the man who has prepared his mind can take on all these terrors. And, here we are. Okay, we're at a similar moment. Okay, we're about to risk the sea of space. And there's all these people out there saying, oh, there's all these terrors out there, whatever they might be, space radiation, dust storms, the gremlins of Mars, what have you, back contamination. Okay, and really what's needed is a poet like Homer to say, no, we use our minds, we can take it on. Now that is the positive side, the strength of the movie The Martian. Okay, that's a movie like that as well. Okay, where you have the Matt Damon character is thrown into this impossible situation on Mars, and he deals with it through ingenuity. Now, the weakness of that movie is he's not really interested in Mars. That's why I say the great Martian movie is yet to be made. But nevertheless, that can-do spirit that we are up to the unknown. You hear John F. Kennedy. We choose to go to the moon, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Right. And he also said, a new ocean has opened and free men must sail it. And that still inspires people who hear that today. You hear the video of that and you say, wow, and it's still there. But that message needs to be taken forward. And, Roddenberry tried to do it and did it a bit in the original Star Trek, actually. Because Kirk's ready for anything. Screw the Prime Directive. He runs into a planet that's controlled by Nazis. He overthrows them. Bang. Okay. That was an America that was much more confident of what it stood for. But he also said that the future could be open. It could be one of infinite possibilities, and we are fundamentally up to it. Okay, that is, go out there. That is all these terrors out there in the universe. We can take it on, and we should.
Well, this leads into a question from St. Miles. Thank you for the super chat. He says, will Dr. Zubrin be among the first colonists on Mars? I'm sure you get asked that all the time.
Well, I would go if I could, but I'm perhaps a little older than I look. I'm 71. And I got to tell you, I watched the moon landing when I was 17. And if anybody who told me then that it'd be a half century later and we wouldn't have people on the moon and Mars, I would have thought they were crazy.
Wow.
Here we are. And so I think at this point, it's unlikely that I'm going to get to go to Mars. But I'm not doing this for the experience of space travel. I'm doing this because I believe that the opening of humanity's career as a spacefaring species is the greatest thing that could be done in human history, and I want to contribute to it.
Right. Well, and we kind of just touched on this, but St. Miles super chatted again saying, there was another one. What did you think of The Martian? You say it's not the great Martian movie that you're looking for.
No, it's not. It's a good movie.
Right.
But it's not the great Martian movie. It's as a movie, it's a solid movie, but it's not a classic. It's Frequency. It's not Casablanca. And the reason is, once again, because it doesn't really, it deals with just one side of the Martian question, which is, can we do it? Do we have the stuff to do it? And it says, yes, that's good. Okay, can do movie. Okay. But in that sense, it's like Apollo 13. Okay, except set in the future. Okay. It's fundamentally an aviation movie. Okay. It doesn't really deal much with Mars and what Mars means. The Matt Damon character is not interested in the search for life on Mars, and he's not interested in the human future on Mars. He's only interested in coming back. Okay. So, maybe a movie a little more like How the West Was Won, but Mars. I've written a novel called First Landing, which I think would make a great first Martian movie. You can check it out on Amazon. It's a crew of 5 that is stranded on Mars, and they have to use their wits and grit to figure out how to get out of it. But there are people in that crew who understand the importance of what they're doing. And that gets conveyed. But whether it's mine or someone else's, that's the sort of thing that I think is needed.
Hello, Elia.
Okay, so we have another question. Tarek?
Yes.
Do you have a question?
I needed to, and we will. Can you speak Arabic?
Okay, I cannot speak in Arabic, so sorry about that. I'm trying to give equal opportunities to speak here on the X space, but yes, I'm very excited to hopefully go to the conference in October. Sorry, let me. Okay, sorry about that. And I just want to make sure, I don't know how much time you have because the questions keep flooding in. We could ask questions for hours.
Well, tell you what, it's 11:20.
Yes.
We'll go till noon. How's that sound?
All right. Wow. Very generous. That sounds great. Okay. Well, there's a question from Marina a while back. So let me pull that up. She wants to know, Dr. Zubrin, what can theoretically be done first, colonization or terraforming Mars, or both? And maybe what do you think is more important or necessary to do first?
I think colonization will come first because the people who terraform Mars will be those who live there. Terraforming Mars is going to be a big job. And now, at the time it's done, it won't be quite as big a job as it is to us because humanity will have greater technical capabilities than we have. Just as we can do all sorts of things that would have seemed incredible for someone to contemplate 200 years ago. So they will have wield much greater amounts of power and so forth. But still, it's going to be a big job. It's not trivial. Right. And the people who will have the interest in doing it are the people who live there, because it will greatly improve their planet. It will, the value of it and increasing real estate values will be self-evident. No, I mean, really, you could view it as an enormous real estate deal. But more deeply, frankly, look, humans are a variety of life, and it's the nature of life to transform barren environments into fertile ones. That's why life on Earth has been a success. Life expands its own habitat. The early Earth had no oxygen in its atmosphere. That's an artifact of life, which has made possible much more energetic animals that have been able to transport plants inland. Here, Colorado, a couple of years ago, I was doing a day hike, and I'm sitting on top of this small mountain, and around me are comparable small mountains, and they all have trees all the way to the top, or almost all the way to the top. And I'm looking at this, and all of a sudden I start thinking, how these trees get up the mountain? Why are there trees lining the mountain all the way up? And then I see these chipmunks carrying pine cones around. So the animals had transported the seeds up the mountain, right, and by so doing, expanded their own useful habitat. Those chipmunks were terraformers. And they're part of an ecosystem that fights to expand itself. And, so humans on Mars will seek to make Mars a better place for life. Okay, that's what life does. That's why life has been a success.
Well, you just said fertile, and it made me think of a question that is kind of taboo and not really talked about, but really there hasn't been much research on sex in space, and I feel like this is probably important for deep space exploration and future settlements. So when do you think we need to start taking that seriously?
Well, certainly it will need to be taken seriously once you're contemplating settling Mars. And my new book, the New World on Mars, it looks at what it will take to have successful Mars cities, not from the point of view of, well, here's my design for a utopia, but from the point of view of natural selection. What cities will outgrow the rest and become the dominant form of Martian culture? Well, clearly the population has to grow more than the rest. And there's only two ways that can be, and that's either through immigration or reproduction. Now, initially, it'll be mostly immigration. But once the population reaches a certain size, the reproductive capability becomes much greater than that is practical for immigration. Okay. And so you'll have to have a society that encourages immigration. In particular, female immigration. And this is actually a very important point. During the 16 and 1700s, the British and French were in competition for control of North America. And France was a much larger country, at 4 times the population of Britain in this period. But the British colonies built communities with churches and schools and all the rest. The French colonies built trading posts, and they were designed to maximize profit through fur trade with the Indians. And as a result, British women were willing to come to North America and French were not. And the consequence of this was that by 1750, when the struggle entered its decisive phase, there were 2 million English-speaking people in North America and only 50,000 French. And that is why we're speaking English right now. That is, the battle for North America was settled in the sewing circles of Bristol. Okay, and so you're going to have immigration, which means you're going to and female immigration, which means you're going to have communities, and also a certain level of aesthetics. It's fine for a mining outpost to look like shit, okay, but if you're going to have a city that will attract immigrants, a city-state, which I think will be the form of Martian civilization,
right?
It will have to be up to a certain aesthetic standards, especially if you want to attract female immigrants. And then now you can have cities that don't, but they won't grow. They'll be left as small outposts. And then, however, okay, you have the following conundrum, which is this: you've got a severe labor shortage on Mars. So you absolutely want the women that come to Mars to fully use their talents, just as we're making now possible on Earth in the advanced countries. But we also want them to have children. And, this is sort of the conundrum that fills many pages of women's literature today. How do I have a career and children at the same time? But the Mars city-state that is successful is going to have to solve that for them or help them solve it. Right. And yeah, so we're going to want to have a culture that features substantial families on Mars. Now, also, once again, I'm not prescribing laws. Okay, I'm just trying to look at what's likely to succeed. Okay. I think that divorce will probably be legal on Mars, but will be frowned upon. That is, I think that people will take the commitment to a relationship as not just being some kind of a sport of, of finding partners, but finding a partner to raise a family with and be committed to that. And, my parents were married in 1940, and they stayed together until my mother died in 1998, 58 years. At that time, in their generation, that was not terribly unusual. Now it is very unusual. And I think that the mores will have to be much more supportive of people committing to their families, because it's necessary.
Right, absolutely. And that kind of, goes into this question from Rasmus saying, if you land on Mars, do you own the land you settle on? So how do you think that, that will be worked out? What kind of government, what kind of laws, rules?
Okay, well, I believe that regardless of things like the Outer Space Treaty and so forth, that ultimately Mars is going to belong to the Martians. It'll belong to the people that settle there. And I think there'll be a number of options for the various. See, I think there's going to be a lot of Martian city-states started by people with quite diverse ideas on what the ideal society should be. And these ideas will be sorted out through the test of experience. So some might say, let's have all the land in common. But I think that the ones that succeed will probably involve private property rights. And those private property rights will be awarded by the city government.
Well, Gregory had this question a while ago. What do you think about the probability that there is microbial life already on Mars?
I think it's high. I really do. And I'll tell you why. Because there's natural transport of material between Earth and Mars through meteoric impact. And there was actually a lot more of it during the early period of the solar system, because it's caused by asteroids impacting the planets, and debris is scattered off and it flies across space. And the number of such planet crossing asteroids have been decreasing due to crashing into planets. So they've been gradually being cleaned up over time. So in the early days, it was quite a pinball game going on here. And there was certainly large amounts of transport going on 3.5 billion years ago when there was already life on Earth. That is, we have fossils of life on Earth actually going back 3.7 billion years. That is to say, within 100 million years of when the Earth became cool enough to have liquid water and therefore support life. So that, to me, that means that either the origin of life from chemistry is a very easy thing to happen, because it happened fast, as soon as it could, or the Earth was seeded by microbial life from outside of Earth, which either could be from Mars or it could be from a place outside of both Mars and Earth. Now, Mars had oceans at this time. Okay, so if they're both being seeded from the outside, then they both would have been seeded at that time. If Earth is being seeded from Mars, then Mars had life at that time. And if Earth was not seeded from Mars, Earth could have seeded Mars, because it was being bombarded and material was being scattered across to Mars, a Mars that would have been receptive to it. Or if in fact there wasn't seeding going on, if the life on Earth is originated here, because life in this theory would then be something that originates easily from chemistry, then why not on Mars as well? So I think that there would have been life on Mars 3.5 billion years, either native or from Earth or from the same source that seeded Earth. Now, the conditions on the surface of the planet have deteriorated since that time. There's now no liquid water on the surface of Mars, but there is liquid water underground. And we have liquid water underground on Earth as well, groundwater. And it is still populated by organisms that lived at the surface of the Earth 3.5 billion years ago, but can't live on the surface of the Earth anymore because the surface of the Earth has been ruined for them by oxygen. They evolved in a time when the Earth had no oxygen in its atmosphere, and oxygen was toxic for them. And so they migrated into the groundwater, and they've been there ever since. They're there today. For 3.5 billion years, they've seen the trilobites come and go. They've seen the dinosaurs come and go. They've seen the mastodons come and go. They've seen the Wehrmacht come and go. Okay, and they're going to be there after we're long gone. Okay, so if there was life on the surface of Mars in its early period, and then the surface became inhospitable, they would have retreated with the environment that could still support them. And so I think they're likely to be there in the groundwater of Mars today. And this is the thing, therefore, that we want to send human explorers to Mars and set up drilling rigs to reach the underground water and bring, because if there's life on Mars, that's where it is, liquid water. Yeah. Bring it up and look at it. And then you'd be able to tell not only if there's life in it, but what that life is like. Does it have a common origin with terrestrial life? Does it use DNA and RNA, which all Earth life does? Or does it use a different information system? If it uses a different information system, then we have two separate origins. Okay. If it uses the same information system, then we have a common origin, which could either be from one planet or the other, or from outside of both. If it uses the same information system, but here's the interesting thing, includes organisms more primitive than bacteria, that would mean that life on Earth came from Mars. Because one of the mysteries about life on Earth is that there's no free living organisms here simpler than bacteria. And bacteria, while they may be simple compared to people and dogs and cats, are actually extremely complex things. And to imagine that a bacteria was the first life is like thinking that the iPhone was the first machine. Okay, there had to have been a previous evolutionary history, and that could have been on Mars. And, you know, if humanity went extinct and alien archaeologists came here, they could determine that Western civilization is not native to North America, that it was imported from Europe. Why? Because you don't find any ruins in North America that predate the Renaissance. That is, of Western civilization stuff. You find Native American stuff that predates it. But in terms of Western artifacts, the earliest Europeans to arrive here, putting aside the Vikings, is Renaissance. Okay. So you don't find Bronze Age European civilization artifacts in America. Okay, so that's clear that Western civilization it originated in Europe and came to America, because while there's also modern versions of Western civilization in Europe, there's more primitive versions that do not exist here. It's an immigrant phenomenon. Similarly, we can determine that humans came from Kenya because, or certainly East Africa, because related primate species don't exist in the rest of the world. Okay, so there you go. So anyway, we could determine if life on Earth came from Mars. We could determine if they were both seeded from the outside. And then, of course, if there are different, that is, we have separate genesis, that means that the possibilities for life in the universe are extraordinary in terms of their possibilities, because now we're seeing that you don't have to use this one information system, DNA, RNA, that we use here, but that there could be lots of different systems.
Right. We're going to give X a try again. Time Seeker, you have been waiting very patiently. I think that hopefully you have a good question here. So if you can connect and ask your question, go ahead. Maybe? The audience interaction thing is a little bit, can be a little rough. Okay, well, I'm going to give you a second. You know what? I've had maybe 5 people at least ask about this. So what do you think about India's moon mission? Current news of the day. Very big achievement.
Certainly is.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really great to have a look at the South Pole to see what the water resources there are like. And hats off to India. They're definitely in the game. And they, of course, have succeeded in the immediate aftermath of Russia, which is supposed to be a great space-faring nation, failed. So India is now moving into the front rank.
Right. Now, Time Seeker, are you able to connect or? Oh, there.
Yes,
you are.
I was muted. Thank you very much, Ellie, for doing this. First of all, Dr. Zubrin, it's an honor. I was just wondering on the practicality or your opinion on how useful would the larger transport ship between Earth and Mars be, say, like made, for example, from like 360 starships size?
Well, that seems a bit large to me. The 360, of course, could be a failure of imagination. But landing a rocket on a planet, you have the issue of the plume impact on the ground. This is going to be an issue for Starship. In fact, it's an issue. Well, of course, the super heavy taking off has created an issue which they're resolving by rebuilding the pad. And maybe one could imagine a Starship that is about 5 times the size of the current Starship, in which the upper stage is comparable to the current super heavy, and that would be the thing that lands on Mars. That would be something that would be difficult, but I could see it as a possibility, especially once you have people on Mars who can prepare such pads for it. So I think, yeah, the day may come when the Starship seems small, just as, the Columbus's flagship, the Santa Maria, certainly seems small compared to modern container ships or, things of this kind. The Nelson's flagship at Trafalgar was 1,000 tons. That is a displacement that's smaller than any modern destroyer or smaller warship today. So I think things are going to get bigger over time. Whether they need to get 300 times bigger, that's a question. But as I say, my own inclination right now is I'd like to have Starship plus a smaller ship. But yeah, I think that at a certain point we might see things that are 5 or even 10 times the size of Starship. But 300 times, maybe not.
Pretty big. Well, Todd wants to ask another question. Todd, if you can unmute yourself. Todd. Well, you know what, Todd, hold on a second here. Warren Redlick is in the chat, and Warren has a question for Robert.
Oh, can I go?
Yes.
I wanted to follow up on a question Ellie asked. Dr. Zubrin, what are the potential problems with human reproduction and animal reproduction in terms of fertilization and gestation in low gravity?
Okay, well, we don't have hard data on that. Okay, and in fact, the idea of trying to at least get some data relevant to that through the so-called TransLife mission, later renamed the Mars Gravity mission, was one of the first things we discussed with Elon Musk that led to his interest in space launch and getting involved in that. And then, but that was a mission in which we'd have a capsule in Earth orbit that was spinning at a rate that would give the mice 1/3 gravity, and then they could live there and have children, and we could see how both the adult mice who were born on Earth would fare in 1/3 gravity and how their children would develop in 1/3 gravity. Now, by the way, that requires a high spin rate if you want to keep the capsule small. If you had a 1 meter capsule, it required around 26 revolutions per minute. But I actually set up an experiment at my lab in which we had mice living on a turntable at 26 revolutions per minute, and they were not put off by the Coriolis forces at all. In fact, they did quite well. They ate, they drank, they were merry, they had children, the children were merry. Everything was fine. So I think this is an experiment that should still be done. There's now a centrifuge on the ISS in which, in principle, you could do such an experiment, but they're proceeding with their research program at a snail's pace. I think it's very unfortunate that NASA has never flown an artificial gravity satellite. And this is because the NASA Space Medicine program is controlled by zero gravity health effects researchers. And every time some wild card in NASA, like generally NASA Ames Research Center, someplace like this, where people are a little more creative in terms of what they're willing to look at, comes up with an idea for a Mars gravity satellite, it gets shot down in headquarters by the zero gravity researcher. Because if we went to Mars in zero gravity, if we went to Mars in artificial gravity, it would de-justify the importance of the zero gravity research. And by the way, in defense of this, they say, well, artificial gravity requires engineering. You have to spin the spacecraft and so forth, and you have to control a spinning spacecraft and this and that. And yeah, there's some engineering questions there, but they do not remotely compare to the questions of getting people whose physiology evolved for the past 400 million years in gravity to readapt to zero gravity. And there's actually a story I want to say about this. There's a great book, which I highly recommend. It's called Scientists Against Time by J. Baxter Finney. And it's about the U.S. scientific war effort in World War II. It talks about everything: atom bombs, radar, anti-submarine warfare. One of the things it talks about is the problem of hypoxia. Because in World War II, the bombers started flying so high that the pilots were blacking out because of lack of oxygen, and the planes were crashing even though there had been no enemy action. And so the generals went to the doctors because this appeared to be a medical problem. They said, what's going on? What's happening? And the doctor said, well, this is clearly hypoxia. And if you give us some money, we can research to find a cure for hypoxia. And then the mechanics came in and they said, well, no, what you need is an oxygen mask, because if you breathe pure oxygen, even though the atmosphere is, 1/3 as thick, if it's pure oxygen, you'll have just as much or more oxygen that you have right here at sea level, and you'll be fine. And the doctors, of course, who were higher social caste, said, get these mechanics out of the room. This is a medical discussion, blah, blah. And for a while, they had their way. But after about 6 months of this, the general said, this is bullshit. Okay, they're not going to find a cure for hypoxia, a pill that makes people need less oxygen. Let's try the oxygen mask. And sure, yeah, there were engineering issues. And yes, if a bullet hits an oxygen tank, it could start a fire. And there's extra weight. But still, it's a simple engineering solution rather than a medical solution to a technical problem.
Good answer. And a lot of books on the list now to read. Well, we have a super chat from, I'm going to butcher the name, Ivalo. He wants to know, can Elon use a tug that boosts the Starship toward the moon, where it will have 3/4 of required delta V for Mars, return to low Earth orbit on Apollo 8 free return trajectory, and use again in the same Mars window? It's a long question.
Well, you could send a Starship on translunar injection, and it would do a free return. And it could do a free return. And then, yes, you could give it another, punch it up when it passes by the Earth, do another perigee kick, it's called, and boom, send it off to Mars. But basically, that's just going to Mars, doing a trans-Mars injection burn out of Earth orbit with 2 burns instead of 1. It would not, the thing that goes on translunar injection there, I guess you could drop off a payload from it that would then proceed to the moon. But it itself, unless it decelerates into lunar orbit, it couldn't go to the moon.
Well, there's a written question here from Ego Doge on X. He says, Musk is constantly improving Optimus and the Tesla bots. Why can we not use those Tesla bots for long-term durations in space? For example, sustainment and maintenance of space station shuttling of resources. So maybe, what do you think is the role, or do you think that there is a definite role in something like a Tesla bot in all of this with Mars?
Well, there's definitely a role for robotics and artificial intelligence for Mars. Elementary versions of this, frankly, in the Teslas. It's one thing to have a self-driving car, to have a car that can fix a car. But certainly automation, robotics. It'd be very useful to have self-driving vehicles on Mars. Actually, easier to have them on Mars than on Earth because there's less traffic. They just need to negotiate terrain obstacles instead of crazy drivers. But sure, yeah, we could use robotics of all types on Mars.
And Warren, you have a follow-up?
I just have I don't know if I would call this a follow-up. I had a different question, if that's okay.
Sure.
A couple of years ago, Elon was talking about Raptor. It was a year or two ago, the Raptor engine for Starship. And he started talking about Raptor 2, but he said that a total redesign is necessary to make the engine that would make life multiplanetary. Now, SpaceX has made a lot of progress with Raptor 2, and maybe they achieved more than they thought they would with the efficiency and performance of Raptor 2. But do you think that SpaceX has a skunk works and they're working on some new kind of rocket engine that will deliver greater performance and make Mars missions more viable and deeper space missions more viable?
Look, the Mars missions are viable with Raptor 1, and improving the Raptor will improve the performance, the payload capability, and all those sorts of things. SpaceX is engaged in constant product improvement, and at some point, if Starship is successful, there's going to be 5 Chinese companies that start doing Starship knockoffs, and they're going to need to have Starship 2.0. And maybe it'll use Raptor 2 or by then Raptor 3. The question of making humanity interplanetary, you could say we need this level of performance from the Starship or the thing that follows Starship. Sure, to ultimately create human civilizations on Mars, we're definitely going to want to proceed beyond the first generation Starship design. But to do the first human missions to Mars, establish the first human bases on Mars, and even perhaps the first settlements on Mars, I think even the first Starships will be able to do that if they can get it to work. And there's a number of technical challenges there, and they're not primarily propulsion. They have to do with the whole system operation, the orbital refueling, and so forth. That's another reason why I like the mini Starship, because if you did that, you wouldn't have to do the tanker Starships, because it could be lifted to Earth orbit with enough fuel to just kick out and go straight to Mars. Be a simpler operation. But yeah, they do need to master the orbital refueling at some point. They'll need power systems for the surface of Mars. We're going to need a lot of stuff.
Well, I know now I want to make a video about mini Starship. We've talked about this a lot. Ross, you have another question for Dr. Zubrin.
Yeah, thanks, Silly. I just wanted to follow up on the post that you put out yesterday and the one that Elon replied to about why people aren't interested in Starship in the wider public, and indeed perhaps why they're not quite so interested in Mars. So I'd be interested, Dr. Zubrin, and perhaps your views as well, Ellie, as to what kind of narrative do you think we should be putting across to the general public to convince them that going to Mars in the future is feasible and it's a good thing? What kind of messages do you think will that the general public will respond to, given that perhaps they're not as interested and perhaps they don't quite understand as well as us space fans what it's all about, really?
Well, first of all, I think there's a substantial interest in the general public. It may not be, it isn't the majority of people, but it's a substantial slice of people, and probably my guess is a lot more people are interested in space travel right now than people were interested in various other innovations during their early phases. But the okay, but to get to your point, I think that we need to make clear that what we're talking about here is creating an open future for humanity. And this is why I made my point earlier about how artists, understood broadly, can play a key role here in painting this vision of an open future. The Star Trek future as opposed to the Soylent Green future. And this is important, and it's not just about feeling good about the future. It affects a lot of things, including whether there's going to be war and peace or peace. See, because the main threat facing humanity today is not things like global warming, although I think that global warming is real. It's the same thing that threatened us in the 20th century, which is bad ideas, and in particular, one bad idea, which is that there isn't enough for everybody. And therefore, we need to kill them to make sure we get what there is. Okay? Or we need to kill them to stop them from killing us in order for them to get what there is. Okay? Because this idea of finite resources, the finite future, is what sets all nations against each other. Yes. It's this. Once you accept this idea, then war is fundamentally inevitable. And then all that, the various maneuvers that occur, diplomatic, commercial, otherwise, are all just pre-war maneuvers. It's like people moving around the chess pieces before you actually take something. It's just getting into position. And this is the threat. But if we can paint this picture and convincingly to understand, there's no point killing each other over provinces when by working together we can open planets. Okay, that we create this positive vision for humanity, and that this expansion into space is very much part of this, that this is the kind of future that we're interested in creating here. Okay, that this is not just about, you know, it's cool to watch big rockets fly or something like that. It's about cities, civilizations being born on Mars. Okay, new societies with new languages and literatures and customs and social forms and yes, inventions, and heroic deeds, tales of courage and ingenuity that will be used to inspire those who go further. That what this is about is creating a grand future instead of a dismal future, and that's what's at stake here. And we're in a very difficult situation right now. I mean, you know, I happen to know people in senior positions in the American national security establishment who believe that war with China is inevitable. Why? Because, well, there's 1.4 billion of them, and if they all start driving cars like us, there's not going to be enough oil in the world. So sooner or later, we're going to have it out with them. And you can bet your bottom dollar that there are people comparable to them in Beijing who look at this problem from the other side of the chessboard and think pretty much the same kind of stuff, except with a different party they want to prevail. And if this kind of thinking is allowed to prevail, we're going to destroy ourselves. But if we can understand that, frankly, there's no such thing as natural resources, there's only natural materials, and it is human creativity that turns materials into resources, and that by going to Mars with our creativity, we can create a world of resources that will allow new branches of civilization to be born that will create even more possibilities for everyone. That's what this is about, that this is a humanistic vision that we are pursuing. And that accepting this world of limited resources and conflict over limited resources is something that humanity cannot afford, that we must insist that this is the future. And you know, if you accept limited resources, then war is necessary, and tyranny is necessary, because tyranny is necessary for war to wage it effectively. Hitler said that the idea of perpetual prosperity through science, he said it was a Jewish plot to undermine the people's belief in the necessity for war. Okay. Now, it's not a Jewish plot, but it does undermine people's belief in the necessity for war. Okay. And so the people who want to justify themselves based on the putative necessity for war want to create the vision of limited resources. We need to undermine them by creating the vision of unlimited resources. And that is why the cause that we represent is not the cause of rocket hobbyists. It's the cause of all people.
Great answer, and we are just about there on time. So thank you for giving us so much of your time this morning. I just wanted to give you one more chance to plug the conference that I'm going to do my best to come there now, because I think it'll just be a great experience. But October 5th through the 8th?
Yes, October 5th through 8th at Arizona State University near Phoenix, and at Tempe, Arizona, to be precise. Information at marssociety.org. We're still open for abstracts if you want to give a talk on anything relating to the exploration of settlement of Mars. This could be technical stuff relating what you think the next robotic mission should be, your ideas for a design of a human Mars mission, or what you think the laws of a Mars colony should be. It could be political. It could be anything that is of interest whatsoever in any context to Mars exploration and settlement.
Awesome. I can't wait. And thank you again so much. Thank you to everyone who has joined. And yeah, I hope to interview you in person soon.
Okay. Look forward to seeing you there, Ellie.
Thank you.